welcome everyone to another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight's guest is a couple I had the honor and privilege to hang out with while I was in Florida at the 2025 Full Disclosure Now conference. And we had so much fun hanging out and talking that many of you may recognize Artemaeus as being on before, but tonight we are blessed with both of them on, which is a true treat, and I am so appreciative for this and so excited for this episode because I know as exciting as I'm trying to build this up, y'all are probably all sitting there saying, "Stop talking, Michael. Let them introduce themselves." So I'm going to do just that. So it is my honor, privilege, and blessing to introduce to you all on this show our guests, Tillie and Artemaeus Treadwell.
I love it. Hello.
Hello. So, Tillie, since you're the new one on the show tonight, why don't you start us off with the sharing a little bit about yourself for our audience?
I think I can handle that. Well, friends, my name is Tillie Treadwell. I am an author and a retired exorcist. And these days, I just consider myself to be somewhat of a quantum story collector. And even these days now, I am technically a science experiment, but we'll get into that later.
I love it. And before we get to Artemaeus, I just want to ask, when you say quantum story collector, are you meaning like stories from people through quantum entanglements, or how are you viewing quantum story collecting?
Sure. Across the vibrations and around the dimensions, I am snagging stories from everywhere. And they're going to be in books. I have a brand new book coming out this autumn. It's in the final stages of production called Tales from the Rift. They are stories that are based on true encounters that I've had with human people and non-human people alike. And I've also signed a nice agreement, I would say, for follow-up stories and volumes within that new little brand that I'm working on, including a full-length novel down the line.
Very cool. And so, Artemaeus, would you like to reintroduce yourself to the audience, or maybe just share some new highlights maybe to who you are?
Yes, sir. Michael, back for a second helping. I appreciate you having me on here with Tillie. It's always, for me, extra exciting to get a chance to bring Miss Tillie on with me, because I do think that even though you and I, Michael, have fantastic rapport and we had a great time talking, three's a party, really. So it's always better, I think, when we get to all come together. So for anybody that maybe didn't get to see the episode I was on, or maybe isn't familiar with me, I am Tillie's other half. Some would argue the not as good-looking other half, but that's up for debate. But I come to this conversation really with, I guess, maybe more of the very average human experience, coming to the paranormal. Before I met Tillie, I was on a trajectory of traditional scientific inquiry and realized that there was more to the reality that I was privy to at the time, and really hardly had tip of the iceberg. And that's when Tillie popped into my life and really opened my eyes and humbled my ego to the great beyond, essentially. So yeah, I bring the, I suppose, the study of human psychology and animal behavior to the discussion where, Tillie brings, all the paranormal essentially, and we meld the two of them together for practical application for people now, post disclosure. What do we, now that we know that there is more, what do we do with it to help mold our realities in a way that is conscious, essentially?
A lot of people just say that I add a little bit of extra dimension.
There we
That's
go.
all I'm
That's
here
better.
for.
Me and my
I
lame
could see
attempted
that.
jokes. You did a much better job.
I could see that, and I could agree with you, Artemaeus, that Tillie does have a humbling energy about her to where even when I was around with you both, it's like as much as my energy was high from running around and doing all of what I was doing with the conference, it's like when I was hanging out with you two, it's like it just instantly mellowed back down to normal, calm, harmonious self. And I was like, it was so nice and refreshing to be around a couple that you get to be just who you are. You don't, nobody's expecting this or that, and I wasn't expecting anything from you both, so we all just got to hang out and be ourselves.
Well, it helps that I like who you are, that you don't show up to just blindly take from me. So I think that might have something to do with it.
That's true. And before we get into that, I wanted to share, and Artemaeus, you can share your thoughts of this too, is because of the last show we were doing, I wanted to share with the audience something that happened after we stopped the live show that Artemaeus and Tillie were like, I can't believe you saw this. But so if you remember, Artemaeus was sitting on his couch and we were talking, kind of, sharing how we felt the episode went, kind of decompressing and kind of just doing our, chit chat, calm down, and, just see what's going, how we felt it went. When I saw a shadow go by and I knew Tillie wasn't home yet. And so when I saw this shadow go by, I looked at Artemaeus and I said, I think Tillie's home. And he goes, no, she's not. I said, I just saw the shadow walk behind you. He goes, nobody can walk behind me because the sofa's against the wall, so to speak. There's no room. And she's not here yet. And he goes, but it's really cool that you saw that because a lot of people don't see it.
Yep. Yeah, and it was, there was no way that shadow could have been made by anything other than a paranormal entity of some kind, which was neat to experience in real time, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we live openly with a lot of non-human, less physical peoples, and sometimes they do choose to interact with certain people that Artemaeus and I have been making connections with in the paranormal community. Sometimes it goes really well, sometimes it's really bad, other times it's just neutral. It depends on the person. But for me to come back and hear that you got to see that so deliberately and plainly, they tend to only do that when they really want to make some type of statement with someone. And usually it's either really, really positive or really, really negative. And with you, it seems to be incredibly positive for them to, show themselves like that. And it tickled me.
I will further that statement with the fact that I have had experiences with entities that definitely wished to make that experience negative for me, and I had absolutely no control over that at that particular moment. And in that moment that you saw the shadow, there was no negative intuition or feeling whatsoever. It may have well have been, somebody passing behind me in a cafe on their way to get coffee or something. It was very casual and non-threatening and non-interruptive. So very cool.
And I want to clarify the reason why I said to Artemaeus that it was walking behind him is because I saw the torso up. There were no legs visible. Even though I could see where the legs could have been, there weren't any. And so that's why I was thinking, and in hindsight, I realized this shadow could never happen the way I was thinking it happened. But in the moment, I was like, yeah, I think she's there, and walked, because it's like it literally was swaying its arms like it just was walking casually by.
we had Bigfoot shadow.
Yeah. If I might ask, was it a completely solid black shadow, or was there any kind of transparency to it?
It was solid black, actually, because I really thought it was somebody walking by a light, and that shadow, you see it's distinct. Like, I could definitely see the shape of a head, the torso, the arms moving, and that was it. And so I was thinking, wow, she must have passed really fast by. And so just caught a short glimpse and didn't register me. There were no legs until after. And I was like, but it was solid. It's like I couldn't see through it.
I was asking because that's extremely common in how a lot of my buddies will manifest here on this plane. And sometimes they will only come through as that shadow type of person, but everyone who's ever encountered any of them says the exact same thing, that it's always an opaque black shadow. And sometimes it'll show up as like a 3D shadow. Other times it's more 2D, like what you were describing. But there's always something really extraordinary about the way that the person manifests, so that the person who's seeing it knows that there's no other way to explain what's happened there. So for anyone who's not yet maybe seen the intermediary diary videos on our YouTube channel, Artemaeus will sit on the couch, and the couch is pushed up really tightly against the fireplace. And then right above the fireplace is the mantle. There is maybe about an inch of space between the little couch and then the bricks of the fireplace. So even if someone was walking by and casting a shadow, the shadow would have fallen over Artemaeus and not behind him, walking forward between the couch and the brick fireplace. And it would also be impossible for there to be such a dark overlay from between the fireplace itself and over top of the mantle, which is decked out with tons of little decorations in a really pretty display. So the optics don't even make sense unless you're looking at it from a more paranormal perspective, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. I think I'm doing a really bad job at explaining this. Artemaeus, honey, why don't you take over?
Well,
I don't think you were doing a bad job.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment and clarify. It wasn't coming towards me. It was actually like it walked out of Artemaeus and was walking straight to whatever, like, hallway or whatever was to his right, the way he's sitting right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like it would be here walking this way, like off to the screen.
Mm-hmm.
That would be towards the dining room, I think.
Yeah. So it wasn't walking towards me, and it was more 3D, because I was literally thinking you were there. It like totally had me thinking you had arrived.
Cool.
But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that for people, because I didn't want them to think it was coming towards the screen. No, it was going off the side of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it even more interesting.
Yeah. Usually they don't come at someone unless they really mean business. So make of that what you will, I suppose.
Yeah, and so one of the things that was really interesting and was something that we came across at the conference, and I know you appreciated it really well, was the three of us were meeting some people, and a lot of people are huggers and they don't think about how the blended energy works with people. And so I know with Artemaeus and Tillie has a little bit of sensitivity to that. And so I was picking up when a couple of people were coming towards to hug and just be, saying hello and not paying attention and realizing how the energy can be overwhelming, that I just I politely stepped in the middle and was like, hold on, she's sensitive, and they were like, oh, I'm sorry, and they understood. But it was like, yeah, it's something that I think, when you're approaching people, is you that ability to read people to see if it's okay or not.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I had chosen you to help with security in general, because you seem to be very in touch with this sort of consideration. And as you know, I've been through a fair bit. And unfortunately, there are some people who, on sight of me, sometimes will randomly physically attack me or attempt to harm me in other ways. And it was intimidating for sure to be at the conference and to just be out in the open. And although people might not mean any kind of harm, I think it's really wise in this day and age to be a lot more considerate about how we approach each other, because you might not mean any type of harm or pain or discomfort, but being able to slow down and realize that not everyone is there for you to just grab and dominate. I think that could go a long way with encouraging a lot of other types of people to come more out into the open when we're talking about blending with human society. What do you think, dear?
Which dear?
Yeah, that one. The one that married me.
Okay.
The one that stuck with me.
I gotcha.
The number one deer.
Yeah. So, much to that point, I think the average person will treat somebody else really only from the perspective that, they have within their own heads, perhaps how they would want to be treated in that particular moment, or, maybe in general. They do not extend what we would call empathy in all areas. So generally, I mean, you have exceptions, but generally people are, social beings, and to hug somebody or even to shake hands or any kind of personal contact is generally considered polite or accepting or, loving or something of that nature. And it is, only when you spend time in other cultures or perhaps learning some non-human psychology that you begin to understand that that's not the most considerate way to treat everybody in all situations. And actually, even people who have done work with trauma survivors will know that, to not extend physical touch until that other person is, healthy enough and consenting enough to be able to accept it or ask for it. So we, I think as humans just think, oh, a hug is, that's loving, that's great. I would love a hug, so why wouldn't you? Without considering that highly sensitive persons, for example, people like Tillie, that it's considered very alarming to just suddenly be, within somebody's clutches like that. In fact, I remember our first date. She wore gloves, and it was cold out, but very specifically, she wore them most of the time. And me, for anybody who's ever heard my story on other podcasts or in other places, I was pretty standoffish and a jerk that first date, that first meeting that we had anyway, so I wasn't attempting to make any kind of contact anyway. And it took the vast majority of that day, several hours, and even until finally at the very end of the night before she would even allow me to, just touch an ungloved hand of hers. And that was after indicating some mutual respect and understanding for those boundaries that she initially had. And there are people very sensitive in that way on this planet as is. We would call them neurodivergent, or perhaps somewhere on the autism spectrum where that sort of input is overstimulating, overwhelming to them. And I find that working with Tillie and her communication with non-human people and their psychology is that generally it's the same way. They strongly prefer to have mutual respect and understanding before any of that sort of exchange is made, which is why I think the average human gets what they do from paranormal experiences or doesn't get them at all because they aren't exactly a cooperative component in that potential interaction. So it's very interesting to me to see it consistently play out with Tillie that, I have made note whenever we're in public, for example, she would always say, oh, you're like my energetic shield. People don't bother me when I'm with you. And I thought, that makes sense. Usually if a man is with his woman, people don't really, bother the lady at all. But I would notice that if I would step away for a moment for anything to go maybe grab an ice cream or use the restroom or, run to grab something out from the car and come back, that I would come back and there would just be people, trying to talk to her, interact with her. And it was pretty consistent. And after that time, I started to realize that there was something to what she was saying about her general energy just being like a magnet for people. And sometimes the interactions are overwhelmingly positive and sometimes they are overwhelmingly negative. But that having somebody like you, Michael, or I kind of act as like a energetic interruption in that way, or at minimum, as she called you, security detail, to keep people from just feeling like they can approach her willy-nilly with whatever they desire to bring to her. So
I agree. And one thing I want to ask about, because you brought it up in your little description, Tillie, is the fact that you're a retired exorcist. And I've had exorcists on the show, and I'm curious, really, with your knowledge of, like you call them, non-human beings, would you feel like most of the cases that you were dealing with were misidentified non-human beings and weren't what the church was classifying them as? Or
100%. Yeah. And this is where it gets a little tricky, and this even gets into some of the things that Jacques Vallée used to write about with ego masking and whatnot. There's, in my experience, in my understanding, there's no such thing as a biblical demon, because it's non-human people just putting on different masks in order to interact with humankind for whatever purpose, reason, or stimuli is present there at the time. So, for example, let's just say that someone moves into a country house out by the woods. And this is actually, it was a common theme when I was working paranormal cases with the church and then even outside of the church. Family or someone moves into an isolated country house and it's near the woods. And shortly after moving in, they start having some strange activity, but there is nothing really super positive or negative. It's just occasionally something goes missing and it pops back up in a strange place, or they might hear whispering somewhere in the other side of the house, or there's footsteps or whatever, but nothing sinister. The human family or the human party typically will start to say, oh my God, there's a demon in my house, or, you know, something of that nature. And so the non-human person will say, okay, if that's the contract that you want, I'm going to give that to you. And then it'll start to take on those types of roles because that person's already being accused of being evil, whatever that means. And they're already accused of being there with bad intentions. And from my work as an exorcist and just living a paranormal life, human beings are not really well liked or well received by other types of people because of the extreme differences in ego content. And Artemaeus, you can get into that more in a moment if you wouldn't mind. Sure. But because human beings are constantly telling themselves stories and they're telling other people those stories too, it often backs non-human people into a corner because human beings tend to need to learn by direct consequence or cause and effect. So non-human people tend to reserve things like deal making and mind-to-mind, heart-to-heart empathy for other non-human people or for human beings that pass their purity of heart tests, you could say. So what some human beings would call demons, they're not that at all. They're typically just other types of non-human people who are sharing the space. They're being accused of something rotten or however you want to call it, and they decide to take on that mask. But then, like, with cases like Jeff the Talking Mongoose and the Bell Witch, you'll hear that they will treat individual human beings exceedingly different than how they treat other human beings. So they might absolutely torture certain human beings, but then they have a complete... Am I there?
You're there.
You're here.
It's a quick glitch.
Yeah, it glitched out. But they will treat other people, other human beings, with nothing but love and kindness and respect, and they'll nurture that person and grant them gifts and just so many amazing things. And it comes down almost all the time to a test of that human being's heart and how well they're grounded in fact versus opinion. Because when you have someone with really high ego content, that's where a lot of mental illness comes from. So a lot of human beings don't understand the differences between fact and opinion. And you can take it from here, Lev.
Well, so I was trying to follow what you were saying so that I could add meaningfully to it. Before I do that, though, Michael, do you have anything that you wanted to stop and clarify?
Well, the one thing that popped into my head was like when Tillie said evil, whatever that is. And what popped in my head was, in my experiences, when I look at like evil versus good, I look at anything that's keeping you from living your life to your full potential and living, in the happiness or whatever you're looking for in life. Whatever's keeping you from that I look at it as evil. And evil doesn't, in my opinion, mean bad. It just means the opposite of living. When you look at evil, it's live backwards. So when you look at it in that context, it's like, yeah, so whatever I'm calling evil is keeping me from living what I want to live, and that's what evil is. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I've not heard that said before, and that was quite profound and seemingly in line with what it would be that we might say. And evil, then, from my understanding, often happens within ourselves. There's not an external, usually, cause. And again, evil is also a matter of perspective. So, people would call a shepherd would call a wolf evil for hunting parts of his flock, but the wolf has to eat. The wolf has a family, so from the wolf's perspective, the shepherd is evil for keeping dinner away. So, but yeah, evil is one of those things that I have found humans to be endlessly proficient at, both in enacting that upon others and on themselves, whether they understand it or not. And that lack of understanding of oneself will cause much trouble in your ability to control your own life to the degree that you can, and then also to manage the relationships that you have with your fellow humans, or even with the paranormal, whether or not it chooses to engage with you and the type of engagement that you get. So yeah, that's sounds about right for me anyway. I don't know if that made sense or added to what you had to say necessarily.
Well, I find it interesting because, Michael, I've not had this discussion with you, but I'm not too terribly surprised with your answer. And I find it interesting that your answer to the definition of evil is pretty close to mine and to a lot of what non-human people have told me of all different stripes and types. So for me, I would define evil as unnecessarily destructive. And all the types of non-human people that I have talked with and am still friends with, they pretty much agree with that. And that's why human beings are largely unwelcome and seen as either food or some other type of prey, or they're just largely avoided.
Right, and to piggyback on something that Artemaeus was saying about it being inside the individual, there is an aspect to me that we mislabel it as like the shadow side or shadow elements, and it'll be like, it could be a pattern in life that I have set up to where, let's say hypothetically, every time I go on, say, a second date, I do something to sabotage that date and never go past the second date. Well, that's a pattern to me that is keeping me from living a happy life with the relationship. So that would be, in my mind, an evil pattern within myself that I set up and need to change to excel and grow. But if I choose not to, because that's the very definition of our free will, is then I'm letting the evil win, because I'm going to keep myself from living by keeping this pattern, even though I know I can change it. So that I don't know if that goes along with what you were meaning, Artemaeus, about it being within the self.
Mm-hmm. It is, yep. I mean, I have traditionally known that as unintegrated shadow. People, I think this is another thing, a feature that humans have a tendency to do, which is to load emotion or feeling within a word that is in itself simply objective. So, when we think shadow, a lot of people will think of that as something that is, negative or seedy or, somehow bad. But in reality, Carl Jung, who conceptualized and talked about the shadow, really just meant for that to be the part of yourself that your ego refuses to acknowledge and that you refuse to integrate consciously. So it's not meant to be something bad. It's just, perhaps as your definition, it would be considered evil simply because it is something that in a way is not allowing you to live to the fullest extent that you can, but it's your ego that's actually causing that. Your ego is the evil, not the shadow, if that makes sense. But not to say that ego is a bad thing either. Again, when we got to be very careful, I think, using these words. For most people, they would think, okay, so the ego is bad and I must banish the ego. No, we're not saying that at all, just to make that abundantly clear.
No, and in fact, if someone has too little ego content, like me, you're in constant danger, physically and socially, because you can't then connect with the people around you unless they have the same type of inherent psychology as you do, or you are exclusively working with people who have tamed and shaped the ego into a more, I suppose you could say, amenable, cooperative amount. And that's extremely rare within the human population. So for me, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was diagnosed with what's now being called level 1 autism, which is the highest functioning autism. But then they also noted that I seemed to have extremely low ego content and extremely low emotional content. And that's always been a challenge for me, because I just can't seem to grasp a lot of how other people think and feel and act around me. So please bear in mind then that the ego is not necessarily evil. It's how much someone has and how they choose to work with it or not in a lot of cases. Hope that makes sense.
It does. And one of the things that I was told that resonated with me was, at first I was told ego needs to be destroyed to ascend, and then I was like, something just didn't feel right, but it was like, okay, yeah, I get it, because how it acts. But then somebody said, well, when you look at ego, it's EGO. And they go, what if you renamed it Earth Guide Only? And it's designed to help you exist here on Earth. Not in the astral plane, not on the moon, so to speak, but here on the planet. It helps you navigate this 3D world on this planet. And when I thought about it, I was like, I like that, because it's like, my mind started going, well, look at Quantum Leap. He had the holographic guy that would come in and help him that only he could see. And some people could call it the angel or the devil on the shoulder, or, a inner voice that helps them. But when you look at it in that aspect, it's, you're being guided here. And it makes sense how it protects you here. But when you go to another realm, it doesn't know how to operate, so it goes into fear mode, and you have to remember, hey, this isn't your realm, so you can either stay with the Earth realm, or we can grow together, and you can learn to break free of your own programming, so to speak, and can learn to function out here in the other realms or not. And so it's almost like there's two beings interacting at the same time in one space.
I think you nailed that, yes. And to maybe make it a little bit more relatable to the wider audience, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would be familiar with the Little Mermaid tale, whether the original one or, of course, Disney's retelling of that. Either way, it centers around a mermaid who wants to become a human. She wants to explore the human world and mingle with the human beings and have all of the human experiences. And in the original tale, the little mermaid wanted to become a human because she, quote unquote, didn't have a soul. In my understanding, in working with the non-human people that I have, it's not that they don't have souls, it's that they don't have firm ego content. And so in their existence, they are switching between personality masks and ego masks all the time. But because they also don't have much emotional content either, they're not getting the rich experience that human beings do who have moderate to high amounts of ego. So you could look at it like human beings are caught up in the dramas of life all the time, and they're feeling the full range of emotions because of the ego. And they are having the highs and the lows of all of those emotions, and that's what makes them feel, quote unquote, alive. The non-human people don't tend to have that except in extreme negative or extreme positive, quote unquote, cases where something really gets under their skin one way or another. And so they kind of traditionally envy human beings for the ego experiences and the emotional experiences, as well as the physical experiences, because Earth is the densest, most pleasurable realm in a lot of ways. But then human beings often want to become enlightened and become like the fairies or the gods and the angels and whatnot. So it's basically just everyone wanting to switch sides and pull a Freaky Friday if they could.
And I have 3 points to kind of add to this. So, when you say masking, it reminds me that, in clinical psychology, when a therapist, let's just say, or a psychologist is assessing a person on the autism spectrum, they will often mention a practice used by the autistic individual called masking. And this is an abundant thing that's now known. You can see many videos on YouTube about it, where the autistic person is saying, yeah, I've just learned how to kind of blend in with the social scene, aka the egotistical scene, I guess, that is the average human's experience, and it's a mask for them. They're not really having, relating to those highly emotional states that a person high in ego would have. And with the increasing prevalence of high functioning autism diagnoses, of the population, we're seeing more and more, rather than viewing that, especially in the younger folks, but rather than seeing that as some sort of, mental defect or, a de-evolution, it's been said, and I think I can kind of agree, that we are shifting the experience, the human experience anyway, more towards that objective non-human psychology, with more of these individuals who are on the autism spectrum, and we're moving away from that high ego content into this more objective, less ego space. And a second point, going all the way back to what you said, Michael, about you must destroy the ego to ascend. That, I think, is true in the sense that if you consider, once we leave this earth, an ascension, when you die, your ego does not come with you, then indeed, yes, the ego must be destroyed to have ascension. However, that is one dimension of ascension, and obviously not one that we are all meant to simultaneously experience until our natural conclusion. But there are other ways too that the average person, such as myself, who I would consider to have a fair amount of ego content, I'm working on dialing that back and getting it under control. But there are places, as you said, that you can experience without so much of that ego. And I, for myself anyway, have noticed that when I am traveling either in, theta or delta brain waves, so twilight or deep sleep, that there are plenty of times where I go and my ego is not with me. And I know this after I wake up, because the way that I respond to things that happen in the dream are so chill that if they happened in my waking reality now, I probably absolutely lose my mind. But that doesn't happen in my dream states. Like, for example, I'm actually tell this one because this has been an evolution in the types of dreams that I have had, which is where a chunk of my paranormal experiences tend to happen. And this was maybe a few nights ago, actually. I was dreaming that, much like at the convention, we were all in this, resort type area, and somebody called everybody in the convention to a main auditorium. And you could kind of feel the energy in the air. It was like, oh, something's not quite right, because this isn't something that was on the docket. Like, we weren't all supposed to be called to the auditorium for whatever reason. It was supposed to be just, you go where you want to go kind of thing. And so I can hear murmurings of some people like, oh, something's going on. I don't know how I feel about this, nervousness. And, I get into this auditorium, I'm sitting there, people are lining up, and you can hear the egos popping up. One person saying, I really don't like this. This is, they're herding us into a room. They're trapping us. And another person saying, it's just you being, extra drama, and, it's just your own perception. Shut up. It's, whatever, just sitting there back and forth, and we're all sitting in these auditorium seats. It's quieted down. And then I distinctly feel that there is a presence that I can't see, but it starts to move across the aisles, assessing each individual person. And the woman next to me was actually picked up out of her seat, and she was screaming bloody murder, because obviously you don't see anything, and you've been physically removed from your seat and picked up in the air, and she was terrified. But this entity took her backstage somewhere, and you can hear her still screaming the whole way. And everybody's still sitting in the auditorium like, what do we do, what do we do? And I feel whatever this thing is come gliding to the front of me, and I feel it start to reach out and tighten around my neck like it wanted to choke me out. And in that moment, I had a split conscious awareness. I had the, oh my God, something's going to choke me to death. But then I had the, just wait, you don't actually know what's going to happen here. And it sat there for a minute, and then moved on to the next person. And if this happened to me in real life, rest assured, I'd be crapping my pants. But, in this dream state, I was actually able to just watch what was going on, instead of letting that, the lower part of the brain, the primitive brain, go, man, somebody just got picked up by something you can't see, and they're screaming, you should be terrified right now. But I wasn't. So I think that the more, and to the point that I'm trying to make here, and I try to make in every talk that I do, is that the more inner work that you do, you work on integrating that shadow and taming your judgments, and learning to be more objective and empathetic and considerate and cooperative. All of this stuff that therapists will tell you in bits and pieces over time to do, just to quote unquote become a better person. This kind of work that I've been doing over the last decade or so since I've known Tillie has really shifted my perspective of things and helped to dim down that ego, become much more objective, and then the quality of my dreams have even changed, as evidenced by this type of dream that I mean, this would never have been something that I would dream before. It would be the typical, I'm late for class, the bell rings, and I can't find my locker, the combination's not working, people have had that, I'm late for work, whatever it is. And now it's more of these almost esoteric type, dreams, talking to Egyptian gods and, just all kinds of stuff. So people want so badly maybe to have the paranormal experience, or they're terrified of it. But rather than focusing on that so hard, I can attest that if you just turn your attention inward and you do as much as you can to make yourself the best version that you can be, it all starts there.
I think it would be really neat if you could talk about the experience that you had at the haunted mansion, as we so call it. Start from when we first got there, what you first swear that you felt, and then what happened that night, and then how the rest of the trip went for the convention.
Yeah, so that was another dream. I don't know, Michael, if that's something you want to hear.
Oh, we talked about it at the conference, and I'm totally open to it here.
Cool. Yeah. So we Tillie calls it the haunted mansion, but we rented an Airbnb for the convention, and it was an old house. We're talking like Spanish missionary style. Remember the Alamo sort of architecture, and down there by the beach in Florida, and the super old wood floors. And as soon as I opened the door, I went, nope. There is so much here, and we are definitely not the only two people here right now. And I just remember feeling this constant, like low grade anxiety, really, even though I didn't really feel like I was going to be harmed. It was just oh my God, there is so much here. And I'm generally not perceptive of that. It has to be cranked up like 10 times for me to actually feel it, but I felt it. And so, we went to bed that night. I had a dream that I was, I guess sort of like an astral projection, where I was sitting up in the corner of the room that we were sleeping in, but I was watching an interaction play out, perhaps of somebody who had lived in that house prior to us being there. But it was an old woman who was being visited, I think, in her last maybe hours or so of life. And I've heard this from people who are death doulas or hospice workers, where they will describe that their patients get some clarity, and they start talking like everything's completely normal. It's almost like they've been restored to health, but they'll talk about seeing people and things that are not there. They'll be referring to usually past relatives or anybody else that isn't alive and there at the time. And so in this dream, this little old lady is sitting in this bed, and she is being talked to by this little, I don't even know what you would call, maybe like a Baba Yaga kind of thing. I don't know, but it was humanoid, like this little trollish like woman who was basically saying, "You're going to get your comeuppance now." And, the little old lady was, terrified. And I found myself partially feeling bad for this woman, but then also feeling like there's more to this story than I'm aware of, because this little troll-like woman was essentially there to dole out karma. And I watched across the room on the other side of the ceiling these two other entities come in that they had totally whited out eyes and were somewhat decayed looking, almost like zombies, you can say. It was a female and then a male, an older gentleman that in my mind I was like, oh, that's this woman's past husband. And these two entities came down from the ceiling, hovered over this old woman, and began to suffocate her without touching her. And this old woman was, struggling for breath all of a sudden, very panicky, but obviously these two entities were enacting something upon her, like essentially, I don't know, drawing the life out of her. And because I've had experience with lucid dreaming, I said, I'm out. I don't want to see this. Whatever this is pretty nasty stuff. And I woke myself up and explained, to Tillie what had happened, that I wasn't at all a part of this dream. I was essentially just there witnessing what was going on. And Tillie, if you want to take over for me to tell what that was about.
Possibly, but you're forgetting the rest of that night that you had. The baseballs cut in half and whatnot.
Oh yeah, later. Yeah. So there was
part of the story.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. After that, I woke up in the middle of the night, pretty, kind of freaked out about the whole thing, and did finally manage to go back to sleep. And what I was dreaming after that was so. Was like, you take the kid to the doctor to get shots, and then afterwards you're like, okay, honey, do you want some ice cream? How about some pizza? Let's go, watch a movie, whatever. What's your favorite things? In my dream, I was dreaming about being back on the baseball field, as a kid, playing, t-ball, practicing with these baseballs that were, instead of being the actual baseball, they had actually been removed of all of the hard stuff on the inside and split open like a Pac-Man. So like, there's no way that you could be hurt by these things. And yet we were practicing with them. My mother was there saying, here, honey, here's $20. There's a pizza bar over there. Just go get whatever you want. You can have anything, sun shining, kids are running around playing everywhere. Like, it was the perfect Saturday afternoon for like 6-year-old me. And I, after I woke up later before we were getting ready to go to the convention, and then, Tillie putting all this together for me later. I'll let you pick it up from here, Tillie.
There's so much I love about this experience because to begin with, he and I had completely opposite experiences of the place that we call the Haunted Mansion. From the moment we got onto the property, I was like, yes, I mess with this place. This is my home. I would love to just live here. And then when we opened the door, it made more sense. It's ancient. It's well kept. Please don't get me wrong, but it's ancient. And the energy there is immense. And there were absolutely non-human guardians present within and around that place. There were several that I picked up on, and they had been there for a very long time. And I could feel them up in the vents and whatnot, watching us. But they didn't want to approach because my reputation essentially is being damaged and judged because I'm in such close proximity to a human being, and that's almost always going to be some kind of negative mark, to be honest and fair, in a lot of non-human people's minds. So they didn't approach me at all directly the entire trip, but they were there, they were watching, and I was getting the intuition that if I stayed there long term, we would be buddies. But I was happy when I walked in the door. It felt comfortable. It felt like home. I had nice, sweet dreams the entire way through. I didn't have any issues with anything whatsoever. But he woke up at like 4:00 in the morning, stammering, shaking me awake, like, oh my God, I just had the worst dream ever. He told me about it, and I was like, oh, I know what that is. So for a lot of non-human people, they teach in extremes. And the extremes are reflective of the human being's inner world and inner growth, how responsible and how much like the non-human population that human being is. So a lot of the time, I'm finding that my non-human friends and then other non-human people, like he said, with the Egyptian god, and then these guys over at the Haunted Mansion, they scoop him up for special interactions now to help guide him further. And they're essentially giving him disclosure firsthand about how they work, how they do things. And it's interesting because there were a lot of things that he had told me about that matched exactly what a ton of non-human people and even the so-called demons have told me throughout the years. And so I believe that he had a genuine experience at that point. So they, I think, snatched him up for a little bit to show him who they were and the backstory behind the history of that house and especially that room. And they, I think, thought that he could handle it and that he would go on to do great, healthy things with that experience story. And a lot of the non-human people that I've seen and met and talked to, they will typically appear as either extremely attractive, beautiful, non-threatening to human beings, or it's the complete terrifying opposite, just again, depending on the human being audience that they have at the time. So Artemaeus was essentially being ignored by all of the non-human people as they were going about their business or replaying it so that he could watch them, but they purposefully did not interact with him because they didn't want to terrify him. And that's usually how it goes when they need to present something horrifying in order to teach a lesson, but there's an innocent party that's there. So this is also getting into why two human beings can see a completely different presentation of a non-human person, or why even human beings' cameras might capture two completely different things, even though both people are there filming the exact same instance, if that makes sense. So, yeah, so it's that's the basis of my understanding, and in line with exactly how I've known all non-human people to function. After there's a tough lesson, if the person makes it through, they will absolutely spoil the human being with everything that they can possibly think of. And I found it really interesting that even the baseballs were rendered harmless in the second part of that experience. So that's my take on it. Did I miss anything, hon?
No, it's funny too because when you're saying baseball's rendered harmless, there were injuries that I sustained from being hit with baseballs before. So even though I love baseball, baseball is my favorite sport. I listen to my hometown team in the background while I'm working. It's just a comforting thing for me. There was literally nothing about that dream that could have been construed in any way, shape, or form as threatening. It was pizza, mom, son, baseball. Like it was really not. They couldn't. I don't think they could have made that any safer.
We're actually. I agree, and I think it is amazing how they presented it. Also, though, I look at it as they presented themselves in a way that registered to him. And so they may, be looking at everything and going, oh, how can we make ourselves visible to this person in a non-threatening way? Well, pizza, mom,
yeah,
harmless baseballs,
harmless baseballs, yeah.
Everything that resonates to him, but in a good way. So it's like they were picking the highlights and going, okay, now he's going to see us as this and register us as this. So when we do meet him, he's going to be calm and okay and not the other extreme.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, that's exactly how they tend to do it. And especially because I believe as a standard, all non-human people are extremely psychic. So they probably, from the moment he walked in the house, they probably already knew his complete past, his journey, his childhood likes, dislikes, hopes, dreams, his financial standing at the time, his blood type, and I don't know, his constipation status. They probably knew everything and put together something really spectacular.
Yeah. And I just want to point out we're a little over the hour. I don't know if you guys have time with being on the East Coast and it is getting late to keep going a little bit, or if you guys need to call it a night.
No, we could, if there's something particular that you would like to get to, that we can wrap it up with maybe a final point or two. We got time.
Well, one of the things I was looking at, and I thank you for that, is we talked a lot and around the term ascension tonight. And to me, I've come recently to a visualization about what the ascension really is. And I'm curious, with both of your backgrounds, your take on it. And mine is we are already starting the ascension process. And the first step to where you know you're starting the ascension process is you're seeing patterns in your life and you're seeing situations in your life where normally you would get emotional or you would get really reactive. And now you're in a space of, well, yeah, that, that's not the way I would like that to go, but hey, I understand that it had to go that way. And now I'm going to go and do this. And so it's like you have a whole new awareness and you're seeing everything unfolding for what it really is and not the 3D reactive visual, if that makes sense. And so I'm curious, how you both look at, is that, a fair statement or, am I still stuck in the 3D and not quite started yet?
I mean, ascension, using that word for me implies a few things. It implies that, you have what you would consider a start point and an end point. Because in order for you to have, movement through space in the, from lower to upper, at least that's typically the way that word is interpreted, then yeah, you have to have what I would consider to be an egotistical description or definition of the start point and the end point. And when I've kind of contemplated that, for me, I don't think that ascension is really the right word, quote unquote, to describe how, soul growth happens. To me, it's more like, like those everlasting gobstoppers where, they have layer upon layer upon layer and they grow and grow and grow. It's growth in all directions. It's not linear and it's not two dimensions. And I think as a soul, you are consistently growing in all directions and will eventually get to experience other dimensions. Just because we call them numbers 1 through however many doesn't imply that one is greater than the other or one is lesser than, let's say, the 9th dimension. It's simply expansion. That's all it is, and it's infinite. But that's my view and definition. Tillie may have a very different definition.
Yeah, so for me, I don't believe in ascension. In my opinion, that's a human misunderstanding or construct. But I have 2 different layers to this, so please bear with me. I personally do not believe in ascension. I only believe in evolution and transformation. I don't label them as ascension or de-evolution because in every age and every stage, there is opportunity for transformation one way or another. And I think that all of that adds up over time for the soul in question. But that said, that also then introduces a paradox for me, because if I say that and I believe it, then I am automatically going to be respecting the fact that other people do fully believe in ascension and evolution or de-evolution, however someone would like to put it, and that's their reality. So while I don't personally believe in that, and I don't practice that, and I don't, preach that, I still respect that everyone else does, and I think it's just as valid of a reality objectively as mine is. It's just that there is some type of separation between me and the other person. So I'm not experiencing existence and the world and ego and ascension the way that they are. Does that make any kind of sense?
It does. And
Yeah.
I'm curious too, as we kind of have gotten Artemaeus' origin stories and how he got started with things in the previous episode, and he touched a little bit here. And I feel I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to ask you, Tillie, were you born with the ability to interact with the non-humans, or did something happen that triggered that awareness and unfolding for you, so to speak?
No, I was born bizarre.
Okay, I was just curious if it was something you grew up with or came later. So I know I just like to ask everyone's like aha awareness moment of it and just get their feel for, what it was like for them. And I'm curious along those lines, for you growing up having this ability and sensitivity and everything, what impact did it have in your life growing up? Or was there no real impact and it was just your everyday life?
Well, for me, it was just my everyday life. But for the people around me, the paranormal experiences and then the things that I would say really upset them, frightened them, and it didn't tend to go well for me. So, for example, there was a small, you could say, fairy type of being that came to me when I was just barely out of diapers, really, and he struck up a friendship with me out in the grass in the backyard, and he asked if he could come inside the house and watch our family, and I said yes because I was extremely innocent. And he did, and he was very good, I would say, but he did sometimes make noise. And he had told me that he didn't do well with sunlight, and so he said that I didn't really have to worry about anything because he'd be hiding under my bed, or the beds in the house, or he'd be in the closet. True to his word, he was often in the closet, or if not, he was under the beds listening and watching and whatnot. But he chirped. So his way of communicating physically was chirping like a bird. And my mother had heard him chirping in the closet and a few times under the bed. But the first time that she ever heard him chirping in the closet, she was convinced that there was an actual live bird in the closet. And I tried to tell her, no, that's my friend Bo. He lives in the closet. Don't do that. He's okay. He's not going to hurt anything. And she thought that I was making things up. And of course, who wouldn't? I was just a little kid. But she tore apart the entire closet. And of course, it's dark in a closet. So the light was a really old-fashioned, just like a bare hanging light bulb. And it didn't work very well a lot of the time. So she had no light. She was tearing things out of the closet. There were tons of hung up coats, like winter coats, in this closet. And she could hear the chirping coming from different areas of the closet as she was pulling items and coats out of the closet. So she just thought that she missed the bird somehow. But then the closet was completely empty and she was still hearing the chirping. It was silence in the closet except for chirping and the occasional flap of wings. And so even when she went and she got a light, I don't remember what she used, but she went and she got a light, there was nothing there, but she could still hear some of the chirping and the flapping. And she flipped out. And she told me never talk about it ever again, and that people don't like to hear this kind of thing, and she was having trouble believing that it was happening and whatnot. And it took her a good while, several hours, to put everything back into the closet because she was so freaked out by what had just happened. That's one example. And it just, continued on from there.
No, and that's really cool. And I don't know if you want to address or talk about, your not being able to be in sunlight and how that impacted you, or if that's something that's a little too personal. I just, you mentioned it, so I was just asking the question, and I wasn't sure if that was something you wanted to delve into.
Nah, it's okay. Maybe another time, but I think it would be a great time, actually, Artemaeus, to talk about the really cool scientific things that we found when we were over at the Full Disclosure Now conference.
Yeah, if we have time for that, Michael.
Well, we're at an hour and 17, and I usually like to go at most an hour and a half, so if you think you can get it in there, we can shoot for it.
Yep, I think I can. I can make it. So we had the opportunity to work with a vendor who had come to the convention. Their business is called Sound Living, and they brought a number of monitoring tools for us to essentially. One of them was to measure brain waves. So there are 4 typical brain waves that the average person's brain will reside in, depending on whether they're in meditation, whether they're fully conscious or asleep. So there's alpha, beta, theta, and delta. Alpha being the what they consider meditative state. Beta being our usual day-to-day, fight or flight, typically state, and theta being the twilight, so in between sleep and awake, and then delta being deep sleep. And Paul, who is one of the owners of Sound Living, measured both Tillie and my brainwaves separately. And Tillie had hers measured while she was sitting there in a open dialogue with Paul, and mine was measured while I had headphones on with some binaural beats, and my eyes closed. I wasn't talking to anybody, and my brain waves were somewhat typical of what would be expected. So I had some beta running in the background, that voice in your head that's always talking to you. And then at some point I hit an alpha because I was, getting more into my meditative state, and I had a fair amount of theta rocking, which was pretty cool and unexpected. But Tillie, while she was in conversation with Paul, was overwhelmingly, predominantly residing within theta, delta, and alpha, which alpha, not so unusual, but theta and delta, those being the brainwave states that somebody is in either a twilight sleep or a deep sleep, and yet she was actively communicating with Paul the whole time, was rather unprecedented. And he had mentioned that he'd not seen anything like that before. So, when Tillie talks about being, not quite here, she's half here and half somewhere else, she's not really kidding. And that, for us, when we're astral traveling, or again in our dream state, which might be a form of astral travel, that's a different brainwave state, our theta and delta, she's experiencing that while she is still conscious, and here, which would make sense for how she's able, well, one reason why she's able to communicate so effortlessly with non-human entities, or entities that we, average person, cannot see. So that was one very interesting finding. Another being that Paul was measuring light emissions through fingertips, which essentially he says it's not an auric reading. It's more of a reading of your chakras and the amount of energy that you have stored within all of your major systems. So if you have missing light emissions or weak light emissions, you have areas of health concern essentially. And as earlier in this talk we were talking about me providing an energetic shield of sorts for Tillie. My energetic light emission output, he said, was incredibly strong and a full complete arc throughout my whole system. Whereas Tillie's was showing some, pretty massive gaps in places. And we had an energy healer, you might remember her, Ava Pico, who was visiting from Maui at the time at the convention. She performed a energetic healing session on Tillie, and her readings after having this healing done were remarkably improved, and so much so that her light emission output was almost completely filled in. There were still some areas of trouble, but for just what was it, maybe 15-minute healing session, it wasn't very long.
It was something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and the chakras went from Tillie's chakras went from somewhat misaligned to almost completely aligned after that session. And interestingly, mine went from mostly aligned to more of a helical sort of pattern. So basically, energy moving more efficiently through me, we'll just say. So yeah, very, very interesting findings that were able to be directly measured before and after these things to not only prove that Tillie is definitely operating quite literally in a different dimension most of the time, but that also energy healing is a legitimate measurable thing. And yeah, it was so cool to partake in those experiments over the convention.
It was, and it was so groundbreaking that Paul, Artemaeus, and Michael, even you to an extent, and a few other people, we've been working behind the scenes to put together a type of disclosure packet that will help to bring human psychology into the next era, you could say, of disclosure. So if we want to bring humankind into the greater fold of family, we've got to start introducing the concept that neurodivergence isn't just something that is surface level. It might be something incredibly profound, such as brain chemistry, and then further on a genetic level. But of course, that's another story for another day. Regardless, Paul had started to post some great information about the findings on his own Facebook, and we've been working on the first of what should be several posts to give this information directly to the public, including my bodily scans and also proof of my brain scans. And of course, there will be more to come on that later. But yeah, that's what we've got for you.
And
There's
in terms, I was going to say, in terms of ascension, I guess if that is the goal to which we are aspiring, or maybe perhaps the frame through which, Michael, that you're thinking, then the way that may happen is through this deeper understanding of the non-human psychology and using that to elevate our own.
Yes. And in the meantime, if anyone has some spare ego content that I could borrow, I'd be most grateful.
Careful what you ask for.
Right. I've got all you can handle.
This might be true. I've had about enough of you after 10 years.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd be sitting there volunteering for more ego. I'm like, I'm having fun balancing it out and just letting it be what it's being and me being what I'm being. And I don't, adding more, I don't think. Nope. I'll let you have that ride.
Well, maybe next time I'll come back with more ego content. I don't know.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you both for coming on. And if people want to follow or ask questions of you both, what's the best way for people to find you?
All right, I'll take it. So we have a YouTube channel called The Weird Walk Home, where currently I'm working on that series called The Intermediary Diaries, where I basically, vlog all of my paranormal experiences since being with Tillie and the takeaway lessons that I've had from them over the years. And that's the one place that we're putting out content, but then also we can be reached on Tillie's Facebook, which is Tillie Treadwell. And we're hoping to, I think we've been invited to speak at the next Full Disclosure Now conference. So when those dates come out, it might either be in Sedona or maybe again in Florida, we'll be able to meet and talk with everybody there. And I think that's currently what we got going on. And when Tillie's books come out, as they do, she'll be posting those to her Facebook.
Yeah. Also, you forgot, I don't know how, but we got invited to speak at another conference in early 2026.
In Maryland, yes.
Maryland, yes, with our new buddy, Brandon Niblett from the Full Disclosure Now conference. So we've been working somewhat closely with him on some really, I would say, neat projects.
Yeah, and so a lot of exciting opportunities coming up, and weird time.
Yes, I forgot to say, if anyone wants to get a strange taste of my own understandings of life and life after life, here you go. This is Weird Time. My good friend Tim Swartz from Ancient Aliens and other shows, he's got a fantastic team of us writers over there at Zontar Press, and this was my premiere contribution to the paranormal authorship world. I'm pretty proud of it. There's a lot of exotic science in there that I talk about that I think fans of this show might really be interested in. You can get that over at Amazon.
Very cool. And the links, I believe, are in the description. So we had already planned for that. So if not, just do a search on Amazon for Weird Times and you'll find it.
Yes, Weird Time, exploring the mysteries of time and space.
So, very cool. Thank you both for coming on. And, I will say if we do get together again for the Full Disclosure in Florida, I do think maybe, one or two more trips to the 80 flavor ice cream might be in order.
And another grouper sandwich. I'm down for that.
Sandwich, yes.
Oh, yes. We hunt down another grouper sandwich.
What were the names of those places? Oh my gosh, they were so good, and I can never remember names.
Oh, I don't remember it all, but I could find them on a map, I can tell you that.
Well, I remember the 80 flavors was you came out of the hotel, the Sriracha Hotel, as Tillie calls it, and you turned left, and it was pretty much almost like a block or two up the road.
Yep, it's right there. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm gonna join Tillie here over on her camera to say goodbye because I've got 2% left on my phone unless we want to wrap it up.
Okay, well, we can wrap it up and say goodnight to everyone, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your adventures with us, and we look forward to having you both back on again. And with that, we are going to call it a night, and I will send us out with the outro. Good night, everyone.